And I would have said good morning, but since it's afternoon, good afternoon, everyone. And of course, I do want to start by saying the Conference Center is on the ancestral and unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. We are very grateful that we are gathering on lands and waters which these nations have stewarded since time immemorial. So welcome to this afternoon's high-level session, again, Solutions for a Healthy Planet, Integrated Responses to Global Environmental Degradation. My name is Rosina Bierbaum, and I am the very proud chair of the Scientific and Technical Advisory Panel of the Global Environment Facility, and our shorthand name is STAP. Today we have an exciting panel for this first plenary, and I'll introduce you to all the folks up at the table after we have our keynote. But let me first say a few words about this session. Increasingly, I think the voices of the public and private sector and science and philanthropy and civil society are all calling for integration or systems thinking to solve the environmental crises affecting the planet and all peoples around the world. And I think in many ways, we are all now finally coming to realize what the First Nations have known for thousands of years, that we must all row together. The scientists certainly agree. The World Consensus on Climate Science, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, as well as the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, and many, many, many other reports conclude that the problems of climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, poverty, and inequity are interconnected and mutually reinforcing or mutually rupturing. Perhaps more remarkable than getting the scientists to agree is actually that the economists agree. And the Staid World Economic Forum has concluded since the year 2020 that environmental risks dominate the long-term global risks. And again, their list includes biodiversity loss, failure to mitigate climate change, failure to adapt to climate change, natural disasters exacerbated by environmental degradation, and then the cascading effects of livelihood crises, migration, and loss of social cohesion. It is actually estimated that some $44 trillion, or half of the world's GDP, depends on natural systems, and we need them. We have to value them appropriately and incorporate that value into our accounting systems. I mean, one example of doing so that many of you know is payment for ecosystem services, which can integrate avoided deforestation, watershed protection, land management, and sustainable livelihoods when it is aligned with communal, collaborative, inclusive decision-making. And third, the international community agrees we need integration. The multilateral environmental agreements are increasingly calling for integration across nature-positive, climate-positive, and equity-positive actions. Otherwise, solving one problem can lead to unintended negative consequences. So we hope we can look for double or triple wins where, for example, restoring coastal wetlands can protect people, can enhance fisheries, and can improve livelihoods, and can store more carbon. So that really means we need to look at the big picture, considering multiple perspectives, and if you will, kind of peeling back the layers of the onion to examine how things relate and look for root causes and solutions. I think it was already 10 years ago that the GEF was early in recognizing the need to enhance integration across systems and worked with diverse stakeholders to tackle the systemic drivers of degradation in the Amazon and in the Congo and in other critical biomes. And so the GEF began 3 integrated approach pilots, then the impact programs, and now we have 11 new integrated programs. They're just starting, they're big, they're exciting, and we know there's some risk, but there is the potential for greater reward and faster if we learn from each other and we work together across issues and geographies. I think we all need to recognize that integration may have trade-offs. It's hard, but how can integration best lead to what the CEO has called for, transformational change? Carlos Manuel said business as usual will not yield success. And so STAP, as our science advisory group, has offered advice on some key elements of integration, on systems thinking, on innovation, on transformation, on knowledge management, on behavioral change. But there are so many dimensions of integration which we hope to probe today here with this wonderful panel. We need to think across scientific disciplines, across ways of knowing, across governments, and across geographies. So we need your collective wisdom so that we can all row together. And it's clear sometimes some of us need to row twice as hard to give others a chance to rest. We are all in this together, one mind, one heart, one spirit. But let me not delay further and introduce our keynote speaker and disruptor or provocateur, Dr. Carlos Nobre. He is an amazing Earth system scientist from Brazil, originally trained as both an engineer and a meteorologist. So he came to systems thinking early, and he dedicated his scientific career principally to the Amazon and to climate science at Brazil's National Institutes of Amazonian Research and Space Research. And actually, it was almost 30 years ago that Dr. Nobre presciently hypothesized that Amazon savannization could be a response to deforestation. Dr. Nobre was a program scientist of the large-scale biosphere-atmosphere experiment in the Amazonia. He's a former national secretary for R&D in the Ministry of Science and Technology in Brazil, and a member of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, the Brazilian Academy of Sciences, and the World Academy of Sciences. So Dr. Nobre is also the creator of Amazonia 4.0 initiative, and that seeks a new development paradigm based on biodiversity-driven bioeconomy using modern technologies of the fourth industrial revolution. So Dr. Nobre, our provocateur, will prod us on integration and share his thoughts on how to ensure the integrity of this ecosystems, while at the same time, very importantly, ensuring economic and social progress with inclusive collaboration. So please, Dr. Nobre, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon to all. Thank you very much to GEF for inviting me to this important meeting. Thank you, Rosina, for your beautiful introduction. And I will, although this panel will discuss integrated response to global environmental degradation, as Rosina mentioned, I dedicate a lot of my career to the Amazon, so I will use the Amazon as one example, but certainly this is true for all of the planet, particularly for the tropical forests of the planet. You see there, this is mostly deforestation in Amazon Basin, Congo Basin, and Indonesia for 50, 60 years. That's mostly, you see the areas mostly deforested. The development model taking place in the global tropics was one that saw absolutely no value in the standing forest. You see there the data for land use change, emissions of greenhouse gases is like 12, 15% globally. And you see there the countries with high deforestation rates. And out of the 6 countries with more than 1,000 square kilometers per year in 2021, 4 are the Amazonian countries, mostly Brazil, 15,000 square kilometers, Brazil, Bolivia, Peru and Colombia, very high deforestation rates. We have really to pay attention because the Amazon forests evolved over millions of years with such a strong recycling of water. I'm showing here animation showing this evapotranspiration. It evapotranspires more during the dry season than during the wet season. So that really creates the so-called aerial rivers that feed the rainfall systems south of the Amazon, in the Andes as well. So this is very, very important. This ecological evolution over millions and millions of years, particularly since the Andes Mountains started going up 40 million years ago. The maximum biodiversity of the planet is also responsible for the creation of this ecological system. However, we are seeing in the last 50, 60 years in the Amazon, these changes, deforestation, degradation, forest fire, the climate change due to global warming. There's a very serious risk for the Amazon. This is just two slides to show you. This is Bolivia, Amazon, 1986, 2022. This is Western, Brazil, Southwestern Amazon, 1985, 2022, so very high deforestation rates. Let me tell you a little bit a summary of research we've been doing for many decades, how close we are to the tipping point. The tipping point is where you see on the left hand the forest there, and then it becomes the forest only near the Andes because it's a lot of rainfall. 50 to 70% of the Amazon will become a highly degraded ecosystem. And if we had zero climate change, if you exceed 40% deforestation, you exceed the tipping point. If we had zero deforestation, deforestation and global warming, if deforestation goes more than 2025 and the global warming exceeds 2.5, we also exceed the tipping point. And the observations are very concerning because if you look there, this map shows the balance of greenhouse gases in the Amazon, but I want just to highlight the southern portion of the Amazon. It's increased deforestation, reduction of rainfall during the dry season, increased 2.5 degrees in the dry season temperature, but that green bar shows a very, very concerning figure. The Amazon in the southern portion has become a carbon source. The Amazon forest, I'm not talking about emissions by deforestation, wildfires. The forest is losing more carbon than removing from the atmosphere. The Amazon is at the edge of the tipping point. So a big concern that I want also to raise for this debate is the fact that even in COP27, people started talking about, well, there is no way to reduce emissions at the rate we need for Paris Agreement targets, 1.5 degrees, 50% reduction by 2030, net zero by 2050. So let's assume overshooting. There will be a small reduction, so the temperature will reach even more, 2.3 degrees by 2050, and then we do technological solutions in the second half. This is really a very serious risk. The IPCC said rebukes overshoot plans, irreversible consequences. There are many consequences. I don't have time to go over, but just to give you one that all of us know, the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees, losing more than 90% of coral reefs in the planet. More than 90% is 0.5 degrees. And there are many, many other changes. I'm showing here to you many of the tipping elements. I'm not going to describe them all, but just to say, with 2 degrees warming, we are going to lose between 100 and 150 billion tons of carbon dioxide from melting the permafrost. And these other arrows that I indicated, the melting of the ice sheets in Greenland makes reduction of the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, increases the temperature in the tropical Atlantic, that induces droughts in the Amazon, deforestation, degradation, that puts the Amazon at the risk of this tipping point. So those are some elements showing why we should not at all exceed 1.5 degrees. So I'm just showing here the Sustainable Development Solutions Network created the Science Panel for the Amazon, 2019, high deforestation rates in the Amazon at that time. So 230 scientists, we put together a summary, assessment report, sorry. This is the summary of the messages we released during COP26 in Glasgow: moratorium on deforestation, forest degradation, wildfires in southern Amazon, zero deforestation by 2030 all over the Amazon, forest conservation restoration, implementation of a new bioeconomy of healthy standing forests and flowing rivers. Those were the messages. I have also, really don't forget to thank GEF, because GEF is main funding organization for the Science Panel for the Amazon. We continue the Science Panel for the Amazon. So basically, we have to look for nature-based solutions. As I said, zero deforestation, forest degradation, fire, conservation, restoration, a new bioeconomy, and a lot of commitments by all governments. I just want to show you all tropical forests. They have plans, important plans, for forest restoration initiatives, the Leticia Pact for the Amazon, the African Forest Landscape Restoration, and also the Indonesia Forest Restoration. This is really absolutely necessary, and it's important, the launch this morning of the new Global Biodiversity Fund, because this will cost more than $100 billion to restore this high level. During COP27, we launched the Amazon Forest Restoration Project. This is the arcs of deforestation. They have to be converted into arcs of restoration, more than 500,000 square kilometers. They will remove more than 600 million tons of carbon dioxide, but they will also prevent the Amazon from reaching the tipping point. Absolutely necessary. But of course, I just want to highlight a new bioeconomy of health, standing forests and flowing rivers have to be created. It's a bioeconomy of social biodiversity. I just want to, during the during the Amazon Summit 2.5 weeks ago, the Science Panel for the Amazon launched an important policy brief, a new bioeconomy of health, forest standing, and rivers flowing. Will rise, and I will read just briefly what's needed for these social bioeconomies to flourish. First, to stop activities that threaten the indigenous people, local communities, establish safeguards against the misuse of the bioeconomy concept. There is a misuse of bioeconomy concept, saying traditional agricultural cattle ranches are bioeconomy, but we need to change that. Increase demand, finance, and marketing pathways for ecosystem service and high-value, low-impact products. This is very important. It will cost tens of billions of dollars, so we need, the tropical countries, the Amazon needs funding for that. Enhance connections between actors at many regions and scales to support knowledge sharing and value creation. This is also very important to make use of the knowledge that exists, but we rarely make use of that knowledge. And then put enabling conditions in place, so the logistics, land and resource rights, titling many indigenous territories, co-produce production of knowledge, governance, and enforcement capacity. So this is the challenges of this new bioeconomy that we need for the Amazon. Of course, agroforestry systems are very important. They reproduce 60% of ecosystem services, so therefore it's also very important to have in forest restoration large scale of ecosystem services. In the Amazon, we have 2 million square kilometers of areas, 1 million deforest, 1 million several stages of forest degradation. So that will be a very important element. I just give you this example of the economic potential, just a comparison between cattle ranching, soy crops, and agroforestry systems with acai berry. Cattle is only $60 to $100 profits per hectare per year. Soy, 200 and 300. Agroforest systems, more than $1,000. And it improves much better the livelihoods of these people. So I will give you one example here, the importance of maintaining the forest in this new economy. Also, I want to say a little bit about how important indigenous knowledge is. The Amazon is home to notable diversity of social cultural groups, 12,000 years of human history. The indigenous people developed the indigenous science, the agroforestry systems for thousands of years. They improved the very nutrient-poor soils of the Amazon. They were 8, 10 million people, 1,000 ethnic groups when the Europeans came. Today, there are only 2.2 million indigenous people and 400 ethnic groups. And also, it's very important really to increase the titling of these indigenous territories all over the Amazon, particularly in Brazil, but all over the Amazon. Fortunately, that's taking place now in most Amazonian countries, but certainly in Brazil with the new government. So protecting and recognizing the land rights of indigenous people is critical to reach the Paris Agreement and prevent global temperature from rising above 1.5. I should have said that if we lose the Amazon, it will emit 250 billion tons minimum of carbon dioxide, making it impossible to reach the Paris Agreement. So also, of course, we need a value addition to forest products through industrialization. I don't have to say, and the GEF is also promoting a lot the industrialization, the sustainable industrialization, but we need to do that also in the global tropics, particularly I'm talking about the Amazon. This is a study that we carried out showing that all over 6.5 million square kilometers in the Amazon, there are less than 100 biofactories, less than 100. Let me give you one example of two in Brazil, two of these cooperatives in Brazil. One is called CAMSA, the other one is RECA. They are cooperatives which started doing agroforestry systems and some industrialization. They produce more than 100 different products, and more than 2,000 people on those cooperatives, they reach the middle class. Just to give you one simple example, this is the way to go because it improves the livelihood of all the Amazonian people. There are 47 million people in the Amazon, 70% very poor. So we need really this new economy, I would say a social biodiversity, Amazon people, science, knowledge, indigenous people, local communities knowledge, how to merge for these innovative technologies. Let me tell you that we are now, to solve this problem, we are also doing a study and trying to develop what we call Amazonian Institute of Technology. By the way, I want to thank also the Moore Foundation. I think Avesita Chichon, she's here or should be here. And the Moore Foundation is helping us to develop this program, which is really a state-of-the-art innovation labs in the Amazon, Amazonian Institute of Technology, AMIT, and we picked these 5 key areas: forest and social biodiversity, altered landscapes, as I said, 2 million square kilometers we have to recover, forest restoration, agroforest systems, sustainable infrastructure, transportation, energy, connectivity, Amazon water, and also urban Amazon. So we are enhancing, we want to really to construct this pan-Amazonian in all Amazonian countries with many innovation hubs and a public-private partnership. We are developing the feasibility study. We hope to be able to implement this Amazon Institute of Technology. Also thinking globally, transboundary collaborative and integrated conservation plan. Of course, we have the carbon markets. Today, there is a tremendous potential also in the carbon markets, but also the other ecosystem services. They may bring a lot of benefits to all the tropical forests. And I want to finish by just raising this issue, the big challenge, scientific plus traditional knowledge as the basis for Amazon sustainable development. When we look at these indigenous people in the Amazon for thousands of years, they know a lot of the biodiversity. I'm just giving you one example of how many products the indigenous people used, more than, for 14, 50, 100 medicinal plants, essential oils, oil seeds, edible fruits. So we need to learn from these people, for sure. They have the knowledge, and we have to merge that knowledge, indigenous people, local communities, with our science knowledge. And also, if we anybody had any doubts how important indigenous knowledge, 2.5 months ago, all of us learned about these 4 children after that plane crash in the Colombian Amazon, and they survived 40 days with Leslie, the 13-year-old girl, made survival of all her brothers, even 1-year-old baby. And President Petro of Colombia said it was the wisdom of indigenous families living in the jungle that saved those children. So it's really remarkable, the knowledge of indigenous people. We have to value that. The living and sustainable vision of the Amazon. So this is really what we should develop, this knowledge of the Amazonian nature based on science, technological innovation, the knowledge of indigenous people, local communities, as the pathway for this sustainable economy, particularly with this new bioeconomy of healthy standing forests and flowing rivers. So this is our big challenge. I want to finish by now saying that all of us, GEF certainly is very important institution, agency to support the development of this new sustainable development for the Amazon. So let's all do this big challenge. We say, let's save the Amazon. Let's save the Amazon people. This is the Amazon we want, all of us want, but this is also how we want all the planet. Thank you very much.
Congratulations, Dr. Nobre. That was quite amazing. What a beautiful PowerPoint, but so sobering, but heartfelt and filled with hope, too. I mean, the science panel for the Amazon bringing traditional knowledge and local communities and scientists together to create a bioeconomy involving co-production of knowledge, which we've heard so often in the last few days is absolutely necessary to make progress. So thank you for that provocative, as you were told to do, provocative, wonderful presentation. So now I want to introduce all these amazing people up here. The problem is their resumes are extraordinarily long, so let me see if I can do adequate, quick justice. So let me start with Monica Medina, who is the president and CEO of the Wildlife Conservation Society since June, and they are focused on saving wildlife and wild places. But before that, Monica was a fabulous civil servant working for the U.S. Secretary of State as the Assistant Secretary for Oceans and International Environmental and Science Affairs, and has done a lot of work on all the multilateral agreements, especially on the issue of 30 by 30, but has a really great affection for where we are now because she has worked on oceans for many years from a previous life to at NOAA. She was originally a lawyer, but now she's a conservationist. And next to Monica, we have Dr. Eliane Ubali-Zoro, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Center for International Forestry Research and World Agroforestry, and Director General of ECRAF, which is its acronym. And she has an amazing background in agriculture and molecular genetics, but has also made contributions to gender equity and sustainable prosperity and innovation. And I understand you were born in Rwanda, but raised on 3 continents. And you knew from an early age that you wanted a career in service to the world. So we welcome Eliane. Third, I think I have Rashid Somalia, who is a professor and Canada Research Chair in Interdisciplinary Oceans and Fisheries Economics at the University of British Columbia. His research focuses obviously on the marine ecosystem and valuation, but also on analysis of global issues like subsidies, climate change, and plastic and oil spills. And you also got an interest in the environment in your early life when your grandfather said, people should walk as if the ground feels pain, which I think is lovely. And again, I have to say, he is the 2023 recipient of the Tyler Prize for Environmental Achievement. So welcome and congratulations. Next, we have Lucy Mulinke, who is a Maasai woman from Kenya who began her activism as a journalist. And we know how important communication is. She is chair of the Global Environment Facility's Indigenous Peoples Advisory Group, IPAG, which has been very much with us this week in many, many meetings. We're very pleased. She's also the executive director of the Indigenous Information Network and co-founder of the Indigenous Women and Biodiversity Network and the African Indigenous Women's Organization. She has been lauded many times for her work in the advancement of the rights of Indigenous women. And last but not least, we have Jean Lemire, who is the envoy for climate change in the Northern and Arctic Affairs Government of Quebec. He's a biologist by training, like me, but he's also a very renowned science communicator, and he's the creator of 1,000 Days for the Planet series, which was a 3-year world expedition to examine the state of the planet's biodiversity from the Arctic to the Antarctic. And he's the first envoy for climate change in the Northern and Arctic Affairs history of the Quebec diplomacy. So you are an innovator and you are a communicator. So this is just an amazingly gifted panel. And what we're going to try to do, we'll see how well this works, is give kind of 3 segments to this. So we're going to dive into the how to achieve integration across sectors and disciplines and geographies and science and management and policy. Last night, the Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia told me, visions without execution are hallucinations, which I think is just a wonderful thing to think about. So we want to, from your various perspectives, how you all have visions of where we're headed and where we want to be. So let's probe the how to get the world we want, as Dr. Nobre said, and see what we can do to build on that. So the first round of questions will be on successes. The second round of questions will be on trade-offs. And the third round, if we get to it, will be on new tools that we can use to build the future that we want. So let's see, maybe, Monica, why don't I start with you, because integration across management practices has proven to be really difficult. And I know that you have looked at how different management practices can yield more sustainable outcomes. So could you say something about management, maybe particularly across like protected areas and areas that are used more for economic benefit?
Yes, thanks, Rosina, and thanks everybody for being here. I know the schedule's gotten changed up a little bit, but it's great to see such a wonderful crowd here, and I want to especially thank the Government of Canada for hosting and for all the work of Minister Stephen Gibault to help get us to the wonderful framework on biodiversity that I think underpins my comments on this particular question, which is thinking about it in terms of nature and integrity. The GBF, the Global Biodiversity Framework, requires that we look at, when we're implementing it, the integrity of systems, and we think about nature and natural systems and integrity, and of course that's the essence of integration. It's to get to that whole. So I think it would be wrong of us here not to really think of nature as a framing or as a way of being more integrated. There isn't a better way to solve the incredibly complex and challenging problems we have than investing in nature. It provides a triple bottom line. It helps with climate and reducing the erratic nature of our weather and climate systems now. It helps with biodiversity loss, and it also helps us prevent some of the worst potentially devastating zoonotic diseases if we've lived through COVID. So if I had one answer, it is to think about the global biodiversity framework's insistence that we look at the integrity of systems. Now, what I can tell you from my experience, and I just came back from a field visit in the Republic of Congo, where I saw firsthand how important it is to create these intact, protected areas, and how they can be surrounded with well-run, sustainable economic systems. And I saw firsthand that the park that we are working to conserve there and that we run for the government of the Republic of Congo is surrounded by a huge concession of forestry that is sustainably managed, and it's all labeled and tagged and can be traced all the way back to the tree. We saw trees, giant trees with barcodes on them. So I think what's possible today is the kind of track and tracing that makes it possible to have this kind of integrated approach. I also think that we really have to think about the GEF and how to use the GEF to encourage this kind of behavior. And again, I would say that the GEF needs to lean into nature. They've set aside 38% for nature, but I think that should be a floor, not a ceiling. There is no other fund that can actually reward the countries that are doing the right thing in terms of nature and holding on to nature. And again, I think back to the presentation we just heard about the Amazon, it's very similar. If we think about conserving these large, intact places and then building economic systems that are sustainable around it, I think we can provide the necessary economic benefits that we need from nature without taking too much from nature. And I'll add one last caution, which is in service of solving the climate crisis, we cannot destroy the natural environment. We have to keep our eye on that integrated whole. If we are so busy looking for critical minerals and destroying nature and ecosystem services in order to get them, what will we have done? So I think nature is the answer. The Global Environment Facility should be leaning into nature and doing even more, going beyond the 38% and the new fund that they've created. I have to say, we wouldn't have the framework without Carlos Manuel's leadership, and the GEF is the perfect place to set aside even more funding for environment, for nature. And then let's not lose sight of the forest for the trees. Let's conserve nature, not destroy it in service of saving the planet.
Wow, thank you. There was quite a lot there. Thank you for addressing the co-management issue, which is really complicated. There's also difficulty in getting, shall we say, scientific disciplines to integrate. And so I wonder, Rashid, if you could give some success examples, as we just heard from Monica, but in the realm of getting disciplines of science to work together, because you can't get everything done at the same time.
Yeah. So, most of our problems, the ocean, climate change, all of those things, no single discipline can actually give us the information we need to make sure they're sustainable. You need all the disciplines to work together, not only between disciplines, but also across to communities, to policymakers, to the private sector. So that, to me, is a necessary condition for us to have any potential to be successful. Now, down to your question, to give examples, and I think our university, UBC, I call it a modern university. Our leadership really recognizes. So we have clusters. Supporting and growing cluster. We have the microplastic cluster, biodiversity cluster, and we have big projects like the Sea Around Us project, the Ocean Canada project. There's one called Solving the Sustainability Problems at the Nexus of Food Security, Climate Change, and Biodiversity Loss. And all these are big collaborative across-discipline efforts, So we do that. For me and my group and collaborators, I give you two examples. One is our work on fishery subsidies. This is work we started years ago. It's a group of us, natural scientists, economists, and other social scientists working together. Because to understand the impact of your tax dollars, what it does to fish stocks, you need all of these disciplines to understand it, right? And together we build up a database, which the World WTO has been using a lot, many countries. No single discipline could have done that. You have to work together. So that is it. And in 2021, I brought together about 300 scientists from across the world, all continents, and we wrote a message to the WTO, which appeared in Science. 300 of us, and it was so powerful because of this collaboration. I call her Sister Ngozi Iweala, the WTO Delegate General had to organize a hand-off of the paper to her, which she shared to all delegates. So interdisciplinarity gives you a lot of power because people take you serious. That's one. The second thing is our work on the high seas. And a number of us came together, again, ecologists and economists in particular, but other disciplines, to really look at we, the people, go into the high seas, which is outside 200 nautical miles from the coast of countries, to catch fish, only for 5 to 8% of the total catch, mostly tunas that go in and out. And we need to understand the ecology, the movement of the fish, and the fleets, and the economics. And so, again, we came together, and you know what we found out? We found out that the best thing for the world to do is actually to turn the high seas into a fish bank for the world. That means no fishing. So when the tunas get there, they get peas, they grow, and then they move into country waters. Most of them do. You can catch them cheaply, good for economics. You will leave what we call the orphans of the ocean, fish that live all their life in the ocean. They grow slow, they live for long, more than 100 years, some of them. They live so long, they have names like people. Alfonsino, right? That's a fish. It's not a person, right? And I like to say that anything that can live as long as your grandma and your grandpa, please leave them alone. Don't eat them, right? So we'll leave those alone, and we'll be able to catch. It's good for economy, for biodiversity, and for climate change. Then you don't have trawlers running all over the high seas to catch only 5%, right? And it's also good for social justice. So Guinea-Bissau, Bangladesh will also be able to catch the fish rather than the 8 countries that have the capacity to go out there, the Chinas of the world, the Spains of the world. So all these are really practical solutions that only interdisciplinarity can give you. And this has helped us. Actually, the first high seas has been closed. The Ross Sea in the Antarctica was closed partly due to this effort from science. So let's work together across the board. That's the solution.
And so our universities have to value interdisciplinary research. I mean, one thing that really gives me hope is that the students coming up today are trained differently than we were a long time ago to be, narrow and deep in something, and then we had to spread out later and learn other disciplines. They seem to be more naturally systems thinkers right from the get-go, but the universities have to support this kind of research that doesn't fit neatly into silos.
And the funders too, and actually there are
Yes.
good movements there, so thank you. Sorry. Yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
funding has to come too, yeah, and there has been movement in some of the science funding. But you raised early in your comment, food, agriculture, energy nexus, and I think Eliane jumped up. And so that's a place, which has typically been almost separate disciplinary areas, but where we really need integration, yet, ecosystem degradation can happen if food and agriculture and energy aren't thought about together. So could you speak to success stories about integration across that nexus?
So one of the things that's really critical around this integration is really going from a extractive system to a knowledge-intensive system. And this is where how we're working with the over close to 600 million smallholder farmers in the world, knowing that there's over 770 million people who have no electricity in this world. And so if we look in the case of Africa, about 50% of the population doesn't have electricity. In rural areas, it's 70%. So that nexus is really critical. And so at C4ICRAF, what we really see is how do we create an ecosystem where trees, people, crops, and livestock come together in harmony. And this is really the essence of why agroforestry is important, and I think in the keynote that was really highlighted. And so we don't simply grow nutritious crops, but also nutritious, healthy, productive ecosystems, and we leverage data to allow us to do that. And we have our land degradation surveillance network that brings satellite data, citizen science, and integration in terms of how are we looking at our landscapes to make them healthy, to look at the nutriscapes as we're looking at resilient landscapes and sustainable food systems. And so an example of a project we've been involved in Africa is looking at 12 countries around sustainable food systems, where working with a number of multilateral organizations, we were the technical partner supporting how do we look at sustainability. And each of the 12 countries decided the lens that they wanted to move forward on. And so what's important is also how do we ensure that things are country-led and that as technical partners, we're helping countries achieve the visions they have in terms of the impact and not hallucinations. It's how do we ensure that we're working together to achieve the vision of the countries, of their populations, to ensure that as we look at landscapes, we're really looking at that nexus of how are we feeding people, how are they accessing energy, how are we looking at the energy transition while looking at the agroforestry will still be really critical as we look at sustainable energy sources. So what we really consider important also is in the system, how are we looking at food waste? How can that become an energy stream as well? And so we really need to look at the integration of how are we looking at our systems, how are we harnessing the digital age to help us leverage these systems effectively. And it's really important that we really move forward on a knowledge-intensive and equitable and circular pathway that harnesses not only our scientific knowledge, but indigenous wisdom.
Well, yes. So community-led, country-led, context-specific, and your ending point there, I guess, Lucy, maybe this would be a question for you then. We want to think about knowledge that integrates across cultures, beliefs, way of knowing, and that's clearly central to sustainable development. And I'm wondering, with your experience, can you give us some examples of success stories with indigenous communities and women and ecosystem restoration and preservation outcomes?
Thank you very much. I think it's very interesting, this discussion we are having. And I think the opening of Carlos, the professor there, brought some aspects which are really very important in terms of looking at how indigenous people have being able to integrate different activities. And the good thing about indigenous people, where we come from, and our local communities, we are socialized to integrate already many issues. It's just like mainstreaming quite a number of issues together and being able to come out with quite a sustainable way of doing different activities. And indigenous people, despite the fact that they are from different continents, different geographies, and different ecosystems, they almost think the same and work in different things. They kind of, mainstream almost all the work together. And that's why you're looking at the culture and mentioning about our traditions, our values, our different aspects in terms of looking at the different issues in the communities, and especially when it comes to environment, integrating it and making sure that there is innovation and trying to change. And one of the other things that is very important in terms of looking at integration is the sharing and the learning and the training they do among themselves. They bring knowledge to each other. They share this information and they share the land, and that's why it's very important to look at what aspects and what different issues that we do at the community level and how we manage to bring our voices out there and demand for the rights and be able to work with the different key players. And that's the same, like for example, if you look at the Indigenous Peoples Advisory Group, is able to work very quickly with the other indigenous people and also to work with GEF very clearly and different governments, because we are able to tell our issues on the table. We don't have to refer or to go to somewhere else because they are almost similar together. And one of the richest things that we have when we talk about integration is the way we work from different organizations, different people together. For example, the women who get from my country, whom I work with, they have different aspects of knowledge that they share among themselves, and they know how to look at the different, like, for example, sharing the seeds that they do, planting trees and trying to help each other when there are issues of climate change. And most of them, most of our countries, like 80% of it is in semi-arid. And also we have other areas which are highlands, and that's what gives us the knowledge and also gives us a bit of more strength in terms of looking at the different issues. So when we talk about integration, this is very important because then we have our own science, we have our own knowledge, and this is what gives us more power in terms of being able to look at sustainability in protecting our own biodiversity and look at the different sciences that we have traditionally. And we need to bring that together, as what Rashid was saying, that we need to work all of us together to share this knowledge and to share this science and see how it can be integrated together. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. I mean, one of the things that we've been hearing over the last few days is, that collaboration and conversation means not just talking at each other, but listening to each other and understanding the ways of learning. But you did mention governments, and so I haven't forgotten about you, Jean. One of the things that GEF has been struggling with recently in a good way is how to think about policy coherence, because there can be policies encouraging behavior that is, we think, good, but there can be disincentives and there can be conflicting policies. And so as envoy, the first, for climate change, are there examples of successes where policies are actually being harmonized to tackle climate change and nature-positive efforts?
Well, thank you. That's funny because, I spent 25 years on a sailboat, and I'm the one who will talk about policy coherence, which is funny, but it's true. Since I'm in a government right now, I think that this is essential. More and more, we have to break the silos. We have to really bring that all of government approach in our decision. That means that, if we have to take a decision, we need to have, the team from the Minister of Environment and other ministers. So we have that horizontal approach, but we also need to have a vertical approach where we include other level of government, like some national government, cities, and go further and include the entire society. If we want to have some change, we will have to do it differently. And I really like when Carlos Manuel said, help me to think outside the box, because this is what we need. You all know the UN system. You know how complicated it is, how, it's very hard for small communities to navigate around that. So we need to really think outside the box. I spent most of my life on a sailboat in the Pole, Arctic and Antarctic, and I was trapped in the ice for 430 days in Antarctica, and I was able to do that because I learned from the Inuit. I spent lots of time with them. They showed me, all the language of ice, and so I think that we really, really need to bring traditional knowledge around the table. We need to bring more civil society, women, etc., etc. We need to have a different approach if we want to succeed. We have to work together. And again, if we want to have some transformative changes, we have to think differently.
And I do think that we are seeing signs of this. As I was saying, more and more the Biodiversity Convention is talking about climate, and climate is talking about nature positive, and Dr. Nobre gave us some great examples. But it is really tricky to build from the bottom up and the top down these different policies. And maybe that's, a really good transition into the second round, which I was going to just ask quickly for, some things to be wary of or some trade-offs. And Carlos, since we let you have a few minutes to rest, maybe I should just ask you, what do you see as the trade-offs to manage across climate change, biodiversity, improving livelihoods, and equity? I mean, you gave us some success stories, but clearly you've also seen where things can go wrong. And so just some guidance on trade-offs, if you could.
Yes, I think, what I'm going to raise here, many my colleagues already have talked about, but let me say key elements, this big picture from the trade-offs. Of course, the first one, almost 70% of greenhouse gas emissions comes from fossil fuel. So a big trade-off is converting trillions of dollars of investments into renewable energy. I mean, renewable energy today is cheaper than the coal-fired, oil-fired, natural gas-fired power plants. So I think, this is a big trade-off. Also, sustainable renewable energy generates much better jobs. And so therefore, this is the big first one I want to raise, trade-off. The second one is also major investments from financial system in the world, from governments, into a sustainable agriculture, the so-called regenerative agriculture. This is absolutely necessary because, as all of us know, the fund was released, the Biodiversity Fund was created, released this morning. We need to move towards urban and peri-urban agriculture, very, very productive, and release, open, like 8 million square kilometers in the planet for large-scale forest restoration. So even with the current carbon markets, this is doable. So that's another big challenge and also trade-off. And of course, I mean, this large-scale restoration project will remove 6-7 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year, essential to combat the climate emergency, protect biodiversity, and also, of course, a big, big challenge, new epidemics, new pandemics. We have to maintain biodiversity. So I will raise those as big picture for the trade-offs.
And you know, Rashid gave us examples of people working across disciplines in the area he's working on, but it seems to me, Elian, in the food sector or the food, energy, water nexus, it's even more complicated. I don't mean to say what you're doing isn't complicated. And you know, and I've already said traditionally, you know, people have worked on energy or on food or on water. So can you just say a bit about trade-offs again back at that nexus?
So I think one of the interesting things is we're trying to do this work across public, private, and nonprofit sectors. And how we're working together towards high carbon, high biodiversity, and high equity outcomes is really critical. And we all know that it's not always easy to bring them together, and how the carbon markets have evolved. It's really important to realize that we need to work in ways that are really have high coherence and where we prioritize integrity and transparency. And in that way, we need to look at the importance of soil health. We know that a third of soils around the world are degraded. 65% of soils in Africa are degraded. We know that low soil organic carbon in soils makes it very difficult to retain nutrients, to retain water. And so within the work we're doing at C4ICRAF, we really see soil health as a really critical part. And not only for food production, but for water access, for how are we looking at our energy system, but we also see it as really critical in terms of how are we working with countries to ensure that when they're looking at their national determined contributions, that they also consider the really critical fact that soil carbon is a really important element. And so we've worked with countries in Africa to look at how do you integrate measurement, transparent and granular data from soil organic carbon towards your national determined contributions. So really the importance of how do we look at market needs, equity needs, and the need to bring back biodiversity in a way that's integrated, that allows us to grow nutritious food, but also to restore land and to ensure that we have that balance around water. I think that it was really wonderful looking at how Carlos was presenting the rivers in terms of the importance of how are we looking at our water, not only in terms of our oceans, but also in the sky. So it's really critical of how are we looking at the interconnectedness of these cycles and how critical they are across the planet, because what is happening in Brazil will affect what is happening in Africa and vice versa and all over the world. So how we look at integration, interdependence become really critical.
Thank you. Wow. And so, you know, that is a lot of what you just said, this explaining, it does, I think, come back to questions about education. And so, Rashid, having not meant to dismiss how hard or easy your work is, you know, one of the things that I see in education is, you know, again, everybody still thinks their discipline's the most important and argues for research monies in their area. And so I think, to quote you, you can't do everything everywhere all at once. How can you encourage, you know, sort of research priorities and improving understanding and management of the lands and seascapes we depend on?
Yeah, so trade-offs are crucial, right? You've all heard about this saying, what do they say, death and taxes, right? I will add trade-off to that. In fact, trade-offs come before the two, right? Everything we do is connected to trade-off. And so understanding, so the science, if you spend $1 here, that probably means you cannot spend $1 there, right? So how you allocate your resources and so on and so forth. So it's very central and important. And that is why a number of us are pushing, our universities here in Canada, pushing the funding organizations to really open up to interdisciplinarity, a more general understanding. So that is crucial. And why is trade-off so important? If you think of economics, actually a lot of what we do is about trade-offs, right? So, for example, there is a project we just wrapped up. We have a special issue coming out in marine Frontiers in Marine Science. And where we look at trade-off, and the main topic there is that if you're able to stop overfishing, that is also climate action. You get it? Because the fish or life in the ocean is not just food for us, it also sequesters carbon. So you have to think about the trade-off. When you take, we looked at the high seas and we look at the carbon value versus the fish value, the fish we take in the high seas. And do you know what we found? 10 times the value of the carbon than the fish. So if you eat the fish, you are actually throwing away 9 times the value of the fish, right? So you have to have trade-off in your mind. And that's why economists say be comprehensive in your valuation. We may get time to talk about valuation. And this comes into science too, naturally. We have to invest our money thinking of trade-offs.
I thought economics was the dismal science.
Yeah, yeah.
No, very interesting. Those kind of numbers are certainly not generally known, which is going to come to, I think, one of John's favorite topics, which is education. But maybe, Lucy, while I'm going down this side of the table, you know, I'm sure IPAG has had to deal with many issues of trade-offs in what pitfalls need to be avoided as you appropriately advance Indigenous rights and knowledge and livelihoods. You know, how do you think about that? What trade-offs you have to deal with?
I think the most important thing, first of all, for Indigenous people, which is important to avoid, is the issue of exclusion, when you are excluded with any discussion or any information. And that is very important to make sure that they're included to be able to understand some of the processes. Because if you go to the community, you will not be talking quite a lot about trade-offs, what you're talking now. But we have a certain knowledge that we keep and share out when I know that you are really recognizing what I am doing and the work that I'm undertaking. So the issue of recognition and recognizing the rights of Indigenous people is very important, because then it gives them that approach that appropriation of knowledge will be something that will not be just you know, misused or kept away, that they may not understand where it's going and so on. And one of the important things that I want to bring also in terms of looking at why we are talking about recognition of their work and the rights of Indigenous people is the fact that when they are left to do and share the knowledge that they have and use it, it becomes very important in terms of protecting the biodiversity and even managing and being able to adapt and mitigating climate change and others. So it's very, very important to ensure that that recognition is there and that knowledge is also kept very effectively. I think for IPAC, one thing that has been very important for us is that we bring this knowledge and we come and share with the scientists and share also with the GEF General. And then we also have been working very closely with other Indigenous people and other you know, processes like the Convention on Biological Diversity. And that's why there is that recognition. If you look at the science that has been compiled, you'll find that people that you're saying that what is the problem that is there is easily avoided and very easily recognized, that we are really making sure that people understand who we are and what we are supposed to work together. So it's very important to have that recognition and to be able to put the pieces together. And what we are saying is the whole society at the same time, be inclusive, and doing the collectiveness is very, very important to be able to understand some of the processes that we are discussing. Because if we don't understand, then we are always feeling that we are left out.
It truly has to be a whole of society and not, you know, okay, we talked to you once at the end. I think what Carlos Manuel said yesterday about, you know, putting women in local communities and Indigenous cultures right here in the plenary and in the center of this assembly was a very, very important start. You know, Monica, well, you can tell me whatever you want about trade-offs, but I was just thinking back to your example about you know, preservation, restoration, livelihoods, landscapes. What trade-offs do you see there? Because we can't protect everything, we need to use things. degrading things around protected areas can be a problem. And so do you have some thoughts on that?
Thanks, Rosina. I do have one quick thought, and I know we're running out of time, so I'll be brief. The trade-off I worry about that we're making now that we haven't got exactly right, and I saw this for myself again last week when I was in Congo, but I've seen it in other places, and we're struggling with this problem of how do we value standing trees and forests, intact forests. And right now we're so hung up on the growth that we have this sort of market mentality where we want to bet on, stocks that have high growth potential, but instead we ought to be thinking about a more balanced portfolio of long-standing intact forests and trees that are like the mutual funds or the bonds in our portfolio. We can't just be focused on the additive places, and restoration is important. I'm not saying we shouldn't be focusing on restoration, but I think we've kind of got the balance wrong. And when I saw those beautiful intact forests that had never been touched, and the idea that those are not valued as much just was really, it just didn't make sense to me. And it just seems, like we're missing something big here. We're missing the forest for the trees.
Okay, literally, in this case. So, Jean, I'm sorry to come back to you as the person in government, but, while environment is loved by many, it often seems that environmental issues, take second or third priority behind, obviously, economic growth, national security, intellectual property. And can you talk about the trade-offs in that interplay?
Sure, but I just want to say that I so agree with what you just said about, the nature, the intact nature. It's because we construct everything about CO2 and the externalities, but I think that we miss the point, for the intact nature. Anyway, there's always a price to pay for change. And when you are doing some politics, it's very difficult to make decisions. But what is the price for a no-change policy, Ask the people from Hawaii, what is the price of that? Ask Canadian this summer. So it's a very fragile equilibrium with decision that we have to make and the cost of it, the trade-off. And I think that this is, again, very important, and it brings that coherence in policies. And it's not easy. And if you permit, I'm going to bring you into the chamber of decision with minister and premier and all that. And I will bring the conversation that I should not bring to the public, but and it will demonstrate the importance of what you just said about the whole of society approach. Because when a minister has to take a decision, the first thing that he will look at is the social acceptability. And if we don't know about, what is happening with nature and all that, it's more difficult to understand and to help to take decision. So also what we have to consider is very often the climate will be in front of everything. And for example, if we want to make some progress, we will want to have more electrical cars. So we will do more mining. But what is the real cost of doing more mining for, nature, for local communities and all that? So more and more we have to, again, bring everybody around the table to be sure that the decision that we will take will be the right one, but it's going to be difficult because we have to act now, and that's why I'm not a politician.
All right, as Monica noted, we are running out of time, but let's try to do a composite of round 3. I do want you to throw out some ideas of new tools, instruments, technologies that can help advance integration and sustainable development. Carlos started us down that path. But while you're doing that, maybe if you could throw out your new tools, instruments, technologies, you could also say something you wanted to say that we didn't say as kind of a new tool technology last sentence. So I'm looking at you, Rashid. So why don't you start and set us off on that last round?
Yeah, it's really great after you've talked about valuation essentially is what you're talking about, right? And it's controversial. Some of us say don't put value on nature. And some push for it because if you don't put value on nature, usually it's forgotten in those kind of meetings. They don't take those into account. So you have that. So what I would say about tools is really about valuation. And it's very important that we are comprehensive in our valuation. There's a project that me and the First Nations Fisheries Council of British Columbia, we are working on, where we are trying to design a very simple valuation tool that communities, indigenous communities, can use to actually try to value what they care about into dollars, so that when they go to Ottawa to talk, people will listen to them, right? And this is beautiful, the method we are developing. If you want to read a bit more about it, I don't like talking about my book, but it's chapter 17 in the book, actually. So that's one thing we are doing. In terms of what I want to say as my final word, this idea of system thinking, the idea of integration, interdisciplinarity, bringing everybody together, getting the information to the people is really important. Without that, we are missing part of the picture. And if you miss part of the picture, you are not going to get the right solution, right? And so with the ocean is a big place where we can really see this. Because you know what? The fish don't need visa. The fish don't care about all the borders we go. They go where they go. Brexit, French fish, English fish, they go where they go. Mexican fish, American fish, they don't care. Microplastic doesn't care about borders. So we really need to have system thinking, integrative thinking, interdisciplinary thinking. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rashid. I mean, Carlos, maybe we should give you, you told us about some emerging developments. Anything on you new science or next steps, new tools, and any closing statement you want to make?
Yes, just first I want to...
You have to turn yours on, thanks.
First, I want to agree totally with Monica that we need to protect, to keep most natural systems protected. In the Amazon, our dream is keeping 80% of the forest protected, using a maximum of 20%, but that's a lot for this new economy. So I just want to agree with that. Technology, needless to say, applied technology, we are advancing on green hydrogen very rapidly. I think it's absolutely necessary. But for instance, we have new challenges. One great potential for sustainable energy, renewable energy, is the so-called ocean thermal energy conversion. So you have, in the tropical oceans, you have a 20 degrees difference between 1,000 meters and the surface. You can convert that into electricity. This is being developed in Asia, in Hawaii, still developing, but this is applied technology that would really mean a lot of, also not like solar or wind, intermittent. This is continuous energy. This is another potential. But I also, new science, I just want to say where I think we need to improve a lot, which is the additional ecosystem services to carbon. We know a lot about carbon, but we need to know a lot about all the ecosystem services. We are the science panel for the Amazon. We are advancing a lot on that for the Amazon. This recycling of water, maintaining the low temperature, recycling water that goes out of the Amazon. This, we need more attribution analysis to see how beneficial that is to all agriculture in South America, even the climate stability for the planet. So we need much more science to that. And finally, as I said in my presentation, the indigenous people, we use more than 2,000 products. We use a few tens of products from the Amazon biodiversity. We need a lot of science to make use of hundreds, not to say thousands of products.
Thank you. Lucy, you certainly spoke to us needing new, more inclusive voices. Would you like to speak to any things on the horizon that you think are helpful and your closing statement?
Yes, I think new voices is something that we have, as IPAC, been really very thinking about and making sure that we enhance it, especially voices of women and youth. And I think the youth have also been very clear talking about that they need to be recognized and they need to be kind of involved from the planning all the way up to the evaluation level of any activity. And also I think it's important, Rosina, to also say that we really appreciate the fact of the fund that is going to be, which has been initiated and approved of to have the youth research the Gustavo Fund, which is very, very crucial and very important because he was a great friend for us all and was a good mentor. And these are where we want to bring the voices. We want also to make sure that we see the women really recognized, and that's why they have also, as women, we have also been saying we really want a fund that can be focusing on women issues and so on. So we don't want to leave anyone behind, but we want to bring these voices on the table. And the only way we can all work together is even that science, the technology as mentioned and what Carlos has mentioned, looking at what Amazon, we have the indigenous people and all the research and all the medicinal plants and everything that they have. We want to bring it on the table. We want to bring that science and the knowledge that we know so that people can know and can understand and can appreciate. I think when COVID came, just to take a little bit of a minute, is that it came also, but it came in another way with some blessings that people retreated to the villages and were able to discover more and were able to bring more medicinal plants on the table because that's what indigenous people depend on. So I think as IPAC, we have really been working collectively together to ensure that we have information, and we also want to reach out to as many indigenous people and as many voices from the indigenous communities, not also leaving the other stakeholders, the governments, the other society donors and everyone, that we really want to work together as what all our society approach that has been said and all government approach. And I would say all indigenous people's approach also, because that really brings the whole health in terms of looking at how we can have a healthy planet and healthy people together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That was amazing, Lucy. And Monica, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but there are some new instruments coming down the pike that might help with some of this.
Yes, so thanks for that question. Again, I'll be really fast. I take a lot of inspiration from Carlos Manuel, who says he's a lawyer by training, a politician by necessity, and a conservationist by his heart. And I think these new instruments that are out there are really important. I'll just name the three: the BBNJ, the Global High Seas Treaty that has just been agreed to. It's really important, that governance, that law, bringing that to those ungoverned places, but the same with the plastic agreement that's being negotiated right now that could bring together so many people around the world to stop the scourge of plastic, which is everywhere on this planet and needs to end. And finally, the global biodiversity framework, this 30 by 30 overall target and all the sub-targets, I think are a huge way for us to get organized, to get the funding, to get inspired. And I think we have to take this moment where these new instruments are coming in place, where we see the peril that we're in, and turn it into a movement. I really so strongly believe that, and that's why I'm at WCS now. That's why I've gone from government to conservation, because I see the work that we do on the ground, and I hope that we can collectively turn this into a movement. One planet, one planet.
Thank you. Jean, I think you've been dying to talk about communication. So I don't want to put words in your mouth either, but it does seem to me what everyone's been saying here is we need some new ways of communicating, but whatever new emerging things you want to talk about in your final statement.
Well, create a movement. This is exactly what we need. And for that, I'm going to talk a little bit about my mother. She turned 90 a few days ago, and she doesn't understand what I'm doing, you know, traveling around the world in all those meetings where we negotiate, you know, framework and all that. And I understand that she don't understand, you know, so it's great because you probably know, dear colleagues, 50% of everybody here. Why? Because we always meet in different conferences and we talk to each other. I think that what we really need is communication and education to be able to bring what we do in a different language. We have to be able to touch people if we want to create a movement. You know, for my mother, the ecosystem services and nature-based solution means nothing. But she knows a lot about nature. So why don't we use a language that they understand, and then we will be able to create a real movement, because this is what we need, a real movement if we want to change the world.
When we had the Indigenous Amazon discussion on Science Day, they gave me a new term, which was called the Abuela Sniff Test. If your grandmother can't tell what you're talking about or doesn't think it sounds right, you should rethink the language or what you're doing. And Eliane, new technologies, AI, anything you want to talk about as and your final remark?
So going from education, how are we harnessing education and translating it so we can bring everybody along, including our abuelas, is very important. And how do we integrate it is going to be even more crucial. And so we need to do this at an accelerated rate, and we need to do it at an accelerated rate of trust so that our interdependence really allows us to move forward. And I think in this age of artificial intelligence, where we know that we can have a lot of blind spots in these very powerful technologies, it's really important to know how are we going to harness them for good, how we are going to harness them in ways that will contribute to building social and human and natural capital, and how do we do that in this framework where we have these new accounting systems that are looking at a climate, that are looking at nature, and these task forces in terms of financial disclosure, in terms of how are we integrating our views of how much nature and climate matter to the outcomes of how we're building our economies, and how are we supporting each other. And it really comes down to what is it we're valuing, and how do we ensure that everybody comes along and nobody's left behind. And so it's really, are we harnessing planetary intelligence in terms of our collective wisdom, in terms of the powerful tools that the digital age is bringing to us, and how are we integrating that to the wisdom of tens of thousands of years of indigenous peoples living in harmony with nature?
Wow, I love that. Are we harnessing planetary intelligence? We might need some extra planetary intelligence too. But I think, you know, it's impossible to really summarize the depth of wisdom on this panel. But, you know, I think there's been a very strong call for, you just can't do business as usual, and we need a movement, and we need a dramatic movement to harness planetary intelligence. We got to change the way of thinking from, you know, appropriation or taking, and balancing it more with provisioning and living in harmony. I think it was one of the First Nations that said their mantra is take only what you need and not everything everywhere all at once, as you said, Rashid. And in fact, they admonish me for saying we want sustainable development. No, you want to actually do better than just maintain. I think you've all called for a whole of society approach, the importance for systems thinking, for creating, I think, safe, inclusive, interdisciplinary spaces where science nexus with other disciplines and other topics and management and policy can all interplay, that you called for implicitly, although not explicitly, having staying power. You know, you're not in for the short term, you're in for the long term, and we're learning from each other in this inclusive and collaborative way. I think also implicit in there was a lot about knowledge. As Jean just said, you know, communication, you've got to meet people where they're at, you have to know their languages. I think also we need to celebrate the successes that many of you talked about today and explain why they are successes. So this kind of co-production of knowledge, involving what some people would call citizen scientists to make people understand what nature is and how it impacts them and why we care about things like soil carbon. And so there's a whole role for knowledge, for education, for communication, for AI. We don't forget our economist up here. Lots of conversation about valuation, and I think, you know, learning the price of not changing is as important as figuring out how, of course, to value intact forests and look for those triple wins and how whatever your ratio was, 9-to-1 on the fish and the carbon. And then finally, really new voices, women, indigenous people, local communities, youth who are the future. We've got to really meet them where they're at, and we have to make sure the new instruments that we are bringing online, even as we sit here today, do achieve this kind of interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, multiple benefit approach. And I guess I would just say, leave you with one last sentence that I also got from the Kitasoo Hey Hey folks that I visited in Klemtu about 2 weeks ago. And they said to me, if you violate natural law, you will fail. So thank you all very much for giving us of your wit and wisdom on integration. We'll give you all a break until the next plenary starts at 4 o'clock sharp. Thank you, everyone.